The translation chamber buzzed with quiet energy as dozens of alien minds worked together, their thoughts flowing through the neural networks that connected every species in the Galactic Council. Ambassador Thalvin of the Corvani race tapped, his long, thin fingers against the smooth metal table, his large black eyes focused on the data streams floating in the air before him. Across from him sat the human representative, Kim Day, a middle-aged man with graying hair and calm brown eyes. The human wore simple clothes compared to the elaborate robes and technological enhancements of the other delegates. He sat quietly, waiting as the aliens worked through the complex task of understanding his species' language and culture. "We have made excellent progress, sir," announced Thalvin, his voice carrying the musical quality that all Corvani possessed. "Your human languages are quite logical. We understand your words for warrior, leader, trader, farmer, teacher, healer. These concepts exist across all known civilizations." The other aliens nodded their various heads, tentacles, and sensory organs in agreement. Kexra, whose 6 legs supported her insect-like body, clicked her mandibles with satisfaction. "Your social structures are familiar. Hierarchies based on strength, intelligence, or resource control. Very standard evolutionary development." Kim Day smiled politely. "I'm glad we're making progress. However," Thalvin continued, and his tone became puzzled, "there is one word that makes no sense to our translation systems. We have run it through every database, every cultural matrix, every behavioral model we possess. The word is night." The chamber fell silent. Dozens of alien eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on the human. This was unusual. The Galactic Council had successfully made contact with over 300 species across the galaxy. Their translation and cultural understanding systems had never failed before. "What exactly confuses you about nights?" Kim Day asked. Thalvin gestured and holographic images appeared in the air between them. "According to your historical data, a knight is a warrior, but unlike every other warrior in our database, knights do not fight for territory, wealth, or power. They fight to protect others, often strangers, and gain nothing from their victories." "That is correct," Kim Day confirmed. The aliens exchanged looks of confusion. Velnox, a being that looked like a floating crystal with multiple faces, pulsed, with different colors as it spoke. "But warriors evolved to secure resources and territory for their group. This ensures survival and reproduction. Fighting without personal gain contradicts basic evolutionary principles." Kexra leaned forward on her 6 legs. "We have studied your historical records. These knights would travel great distances to help people they had never met. They would fight dangerous enemies for no payment. Some even died protecting complete strangers. This behavior pattern does not exist in any other species." "Perhaps," suggested another alien with a voice like grinding stones, "it is a mistranslation. Maybe these knights were actually merchants who traded protection for money, or conquerors who claimed territory after helping." Kim Day shook his head slowly. "No, that's not accurate. True knights served ideals, not themselves. They followed codes of honor that required them to help the weak and innocent, even at great personal cost." The chamber erupted in confused chatter as aliens discussed this impossible concept in dozens of languages. Thalvin raised his hand for silence. "Let me understand this correctly," he said carefully. "Your strongest warriors voluntarily bound themselves to rules that prevented them from gaining power, wealth, or territory?" "Yes." "And they considered this binding to be an honor, not a punishment?" "Yes." "And other humans respected these warriors more, not less, because they had chosen to limit their own power?" "That's right." The silence that followed was profound. In all their explorations of the galaxy, the Council had never encountered anything like this. Every species they knew had evolved competitive behaviors. The strong dominated the weak. Resources went to those who could take them. This was the universal law of survival. Dr. Nethfor, the Council's expert on alien psychology, spoke up. Her tentacles writhed with agitation as she consulted her data. "This violates everything we know about evolutionary development. Altruistic, Behavior exists in small measures to help family groups or close tribes. But creating warriors whose primary purpose is to help strangers, with no genetic or tribal benefit, should not be possible. Yet here we are, Kim Day said simply. Thalvin studied the human carefully. Are you saying that your species naturally produces individuals who choose to serve others rather than themselves? Some of us, yes. The night was an ideal that many humans tried to live up to. Not everyone succeeded, but the ideal itself shaped our culture for centuries. The aliens looked at each other with something approaching fear. They had encountered species that were stronger, faster, smarter, or more technologically advanced than others. But they had never met a species whose greatest warriors gained strength from serving others rather than dominating them. We need to study this further, Thalvin announced. If humans truly possess this trait, it represents something entirely new in galactic civilization. Kim Day nodded. Perhaps it would help if you could observe our behavior directly rather than just studying our words. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Humanity had brought something to the galaxy that had never existed before. 3 months after the confusing first contact meeting, Cadet Veltar found himself floating in the corridor of a human spaceship called the Galahad. His 4 eyes moved constantly, watching everything the humans did. The Hegemony High Command had sent him here to learn about these strange creatures and their impossible warrior code. The ship was smaller than Hegemony vessels and much simpler. Where his people used advanced technology for everything, the humans seemed to prefer doing things by hand when possible. Veltar had expected to find primitive savages, but instead, he discovered something much more puzzling. Captain Park Min stood in the ship's command center, reading reports on a glowing screen. He was not a large man by human standards, and certainly small compared to Hegemony warriors. But when he spoke, everyone listened with complete attention. Lieutenant Lebo, the captain called to a young woman at a nearby station. What's our food situation? We have enough standard rations for 6 more days, sir, she replied. But the refugee transport we're escorting is running low. They'll be out of food in 2 days. Veltar watched carefully. This was a perfect test case. In Hegemony protocol, each ship was responsible for its own supplies. Sharing resources with other vessels weakened your own position and was considered poor leadership. Captain Park Min nodded thoughtfully. Transfer half our emergency supplies to the refugee ship. Sir, Lieutenant Lebo said quietly. That will put us below minimum safety requirements. The refugees have children aboard, the captain replied. We can survive on short rations better than they can. Veltar's translator struggled with this exchange. The captain was deliberately weakening his own ship to help strangers. This violated every principle of command that Veltar had been taught. He made careful notes in his personal recorder. Over the following days, Veltar observed more puzzling behavior. When the ship's engines needed repair, Captain Park Min worked alongside the lowest-ranking crew members, getting his hands dirty with machinery. When a junior officer made a mistake that could have resulted in punishment, the captain took responsibility and used the incident as a teaching opportunity instead. But the most confusing incident happened during the 3rd week of Veltar's stay. The ship received a distress call from a mining station under attack by pirates. The station was in disputed territory, far from any human colony or strategic interest. Sir, reported the communications officer, the station is requesting immediate assistance. But it's not a human facility. The miners are mostly Zenthari and Corvani. Veltar expected the captain to ignore the call. Why risk a valuable ship and crew for aliens who provided no benefit to humanity? This was basic strategic thinking. Instead, Captain Parkman stood up immediately. Set course for the mining station. Maximum speed. Sir, Lieutenant Lebo said carefully. We're already behind schedule for our patrol route. Command expects us to maintain our assigned position. Command will understand, the captain replied firmly. People are in danger. Veltar could not contain his confusion any longer. Captain Park Min, he said, using the human's full name as his culture required. I do not understand your reasoning. These miners have no connection to your people. Helping them provides no strategic advantage. Your superiors will be displeased with the delay. Why do you choose this course of action? The captain looked at Veltar with something that might have been surprise. Because it's the right thing to do. But what do you gain from it? Captain Park Min was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. The knowledge that we helped people who needed help. Sometimes that's enough. The battle at the mining station was brief but intense. The pirates were better armed than the human ship, but they were not prepared for the Galahad's tactics. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy vessels, Captain Park Min focused on driving them away from the station. When the pirates realized they could not win quickly, they retreated to find easier targets. The grateful miners offered to pay the humans for their help, but Captain Park Min refused. We were glad to assist, he told them over the communication system. Safe travels. After the incident, Veltar spent hours reviewing his recordings and trying to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had risked their lives for strangers, gained nothing from the victory, and seemed genuinely happy about the outcome. When he transmitted his reports back to Hegemony Command, the response was immediate and confused. Request clarification, came the message. Your data suggest irrational altruistic behavior. Please verify accuracy of observations. Veltar verified his data 3 times. Everything was accurate. He had watched humans repeatedly choose the harder path, the one that cost them more but helped others. They called it honor, duty, service. The words translated easily enough, but the concept behind them remained as mysterious as ever. Late one evening, as Veltar floated in his quarters reviewing his notes, Lieutenant Li Bo stopped by to check on him. Is everything all right, Cadet? She asked kindly. You seem troubled. I'm trying to understand your people, Veltar admitted. Your behaviors do not match any known patterns. Li Bo smiled. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The galaxy's a big place. There's room for different ways of thinking. As she walked away, Veltar realized that perhaps the humans were not the ones who needed to be understood. Perhaps it was the rest of the galaxy that was missing something important. The alarm woke everyone on the Galahad at 3:47 in the morning, ship time. Red lights flashed in the corridors as crew members ran to their battle stations. Veltar pushed himself through the zero-gravity hallways, his 4 eyes wide with fear and excitement. This was his first real combat situation. On the command bridge, Captain Park Min stood calmly in front of the main screen, watching 12 pirate ships approach their convoy. The pirates were armed with heavy weapons and moved in perfect formation. They had done this many times before. Report, the captain said quietly. Lieutenant Li Bo checked her instruments quickly. 12 enemy vessels, all armed with military-grade weapons. They're targeting the civilian convoy we're escorting. Veltar looked at the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The convoy consisted of 15 transport ships carrying refugees from a recent war. Most of the passengers were families with children, fleeing from a planet that had been destroyed in a territorial dispute. The ships were slow, lightly armed, and completely helpless against the pirates. What about the other escort ships? Captain Park Min asked. The Zenthari cruiser Swiftwing and the Corvani destroyer Bright Star are following standard evacuation protocols, Li Bo reported. They're abandoning the damaged transports and heading for the jump point. Veltar nodded approvingly. This was proper military procedure. When facing superior enemy forces, you saved what you could and retreated to fight another day. The Zenthari and Corvani commanders were making the logical choice. They would escape with most of the convoy intact, accepting the loss of the slower, damaged ships as an unfortunate but necessary sacrifice. How many civilians are on the ships they're leaving behind? Park Min asked. Li Bo checked her screen. Approximately 8,000, sir, mostly families with young children and elderly refugees who couldn't evacuate quickly. Captain Park Min stared at the display for a long moment. The pirates would reach the abandoned transports in less than an hour. Everyone knew what happened to refugee ships that fell into pirate hands. The lucky ones were sold as slaves. The unlucky ones were simply killed. Sir, the communications officer reported. The Zenthari captain is requesting that we join the retreat. She says we can save 11 ships and their passengers if we move now. And the other 4 ships? Park Min asked. Lost, sir. There's no way to save them and escape ourselves. Veltar waited for the captain's order to retreat. It was the only sensible choice. One human ship could not possibly fight 12 pirate vessels and win. Staying would mean the death of everyone aboard the Galahad, and the refugees would still be captured. Better to save who they could. Instead, Captain Park Min turned to his crew and spoke clearly. All hands, this is the captain. We are moving to defensive positions around the civilian transports. Our mission is to protect every ship in this convoy, and that mission has not changed. The bridge fell silent. Veltar's translator had to process the words 3 times before he believed what he had heard. The human captain was choosing to fight, an impossible battle to protect strangers. Sir, Lieutenant Lebo said carefully, our chances of survival are very low. We're outnumbered 4 to 1. I understand the odds, Lieutenant, Park Min replied, but those people trusted us to keep them safe. We gave our word. Captain, the communications officer called out, the pirate leader is sending us a message. He's offering to let us go if we withdraw immediately. Park Min shook his head. No response. Take us to the transports. The Galahad moved slowly toward the cluster of damaged refugee ships. The pirates spread out in attack formation, clearly puzzled by the human ship's behavior. They had expected an easy victory after the other escort ships fled. All civilian vessels, Park Min announced over the general communication channel, move behind us. We'll cover your retreat. For the next 6 hours, Veltar watched something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Galahad fought, like a creature possessed, placing itself between the pirates and the defenseless transports. When the ship's shields failed, Captain Park Min ordered the crew to reroute power from life support. When the armor plating cracked, Lieutenant Li Bo led repair teams into areas filled with deadly radiation. The human ship was dying, but it did not retreat. Every time the pirates tried to get around the Galahad to attack the transports, the human vessel moved to block them. Captain Park Min used every trick of space combat he knew, turning his single ship into an impossible obstacle. One by one, the refugee transports escaped to safety. The pirates grew frustrated and began focusing all their fire on the stubborn human ship. The Galahad's hull cracked open like an egg, venting atmosphere and debris into space. Sir, Lebo reported, her voice weak from blood loss, all civilian ships have reached the jump point. They're safe. Captain Park Min smiled, even as alarms screamed around him. Good. That's all that matters. The final pirate attack came from 3 directions at once. The Galahad, with no shields, no armor, and half her crew dead, could not survive it. But she had done her job. Every single refugee ship had escaped. When the rescue fleet arrived 2 hours later, they found the Galahad floating dead in space, her hull split open and her crew gone. But nearby they also found Veltar in an emergency pod, rescued at the last moment by the captain's final order. As alien rescue workers pulled him from the pod, Veltar looked back at the broken human ship and finally understood what the word night really meant. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Galahad, Veltar floated in the vast archives of the Galactic Library on Central Station. His 4 eyes moved across thousands of data streams, searching for something that could explain what he had witnessed. The rescue ships had brought him here to recover from his injuries, but his body was healing faster than his mind. Every night, he dreamed of Captain Park Min standing calmly on his dying bridge, smiling as he sent the last refugee transport to safety. The image made no sense according to everything Veltar had learned about survival and evolution, yet it had happened. Dr. Nethavor, the Council's leading expert on alien psychology, found him there on the 3rd day. Her tentacles curled with concern as she approached his study alcove. Cadet Veltar, she said gently, your reports have caused quite a stir in the scientific community. Many of my colleagues believe your trauma may have affected your memory of events. Veltar looked up from the human historical files he had been studying. My memory is perfect, Doctor. I have recorded evidence of everything. Dr. Nethvor settled, her large, soft body next to his floating platform. I've reviewed your recordings. What I cannot understand is the motivation. Why would an entire ship's crew choose death over retreat? I have been researching that question, Veltar replied, gesturing to the data streams around him. The answer lies in human history. For the past week, Veltar had immersed himself in thousands of years of human culture. He had studied their wars, their literature, their laws, and their legends. Slowly, a pattern had emerged that both fascinated and terrified him. Look at this, Veltar said, pulling up a historical file. 1,000 years ago, humans created warriors called knights. These knights followed strict rules called codes of honor. The rules required them to protect the innocent, help the weak, and serve others before themselves. Dr. Nethvor examined the data with growing confusion. But this is inefficient. Warriors who limit their own power cannot compete with those who use all available resources. That is what I thought, Veltar agreed. But look deeper. These knights became the most respected members of human society. Other humans followed them willingly. They inspired loyalty that could not be bought or forced. The young cadet brought up more files, showing human behavior patterns across centuries. Here, during their medieval period, knights would travel across continents to protect pilgrims they had never met. Here, during their colonial expansion, some humans fought against their own people to protect native populations. Here, during their world wars, soldiers repeatedly sacrificed themselves to save civilian populations. Dr. Nethvor's tentacles writhed with agitation. This violates basic evolutionary principles. Altruistic behavior should only extend to family, groups, or close tribal units. What you're describing is altruism toward complete strangers, even alien species. Exactly, Veltar said, his voice filled with wonder. Humans evolved something that does not exist anywhere else in the galaxy. They created warriors whose strength comes from serving others. The doctor pulled up more data, checking Veltar's research. According to these files, human knights often died young, frequently had no offspring, and gained little material wealth. By any evolutionary standard, they should have been eliminated from the gene pool. But they were not eliminated, Veltar pointed out. Instead, they became cultural heroes. Human children were taught to admire them. Artists created stories about them. Leaders tried to copy their behavior. The concept of knighthood spread through human society like a beneficial mutation. Dr. Nethvor was silent for a long moment, processing this information. You're suggesting that humans evolved cultural traits that override individual survival instincts? More than that, Veltar said excitedly. I believe they evolved the ability to find personal fulfillment through serving others. Captain Park Min was happy as he died because he had fulfilled his purpose. Lieutenant Li Bo smiled when she reported that all civilians were safe. They were not sacrificing themselves reluctantly. They were doing exactly what they wanted to. The implications were staggering. Dr. Nethvor had studied hundreds of species across the galaxy. All of them followed predictable patterns of behavior based on survival, reproduction, and resource acquisition. But humans seemed to have developed something entirely different. If your theory is correct, she said slowly, then humans represent the first known example of a species that evolved genuine altruism as a dominant cultural trait. Veltar nodded. And that explains why the translator could not find an equivalent for knight in any other language. The concept truly does not exist anywhere else. Over the following days, word of Veltar's research spread through the Galactic Council. Emergency sessions were called. Scientists from dozens of species came to review the data. The debate was intense and sometimes heated. Some argued that humans were a dangerous anomaly who could not be trusted. If they were willing to die for strangers, what other unpredictable behaviors might they exhibit? Others suggested that humans might be the key to solving some of the galaxy's oldest problems. But all agreed on one thing. Humanity had brought something entirely new to galactic civilization. For the first time since the Council's formation, they had encountered a species whose greatest warriors were defined not by their ability to conquer, but by their willingness to protect. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. How do you integrate a species of natural knights into a galaxy that had never seen such a thing before? The answer, Veltar suspected, would change everything. 1 year after the battle that destroyed the Galahad, Veltar stood in the memorial garden on New Sol Station, wearing clothes he had never imagined he would put on. The simple white tunic and silver belt marked him as a member of the newly formed Order of Galactic Knights, the first organization of its kind in the history of the galaxy. The garden was quiet in the artificial morning light, filled with plants from dozens of worlds. At its center stood a simple stone monument with names carved in many languages. Captain Park Min's name was at the top, followed by Lieutenant Li Bo and the rest of the Galahad's crew. Below their names, in letters that seemed to glow with inner light, were the words that had become the motto of the new order: service before self. Veltar was not alone in the garden. Representatives from over 50 species had requested admission to the Order of Galactic Knights. They came from every corner of known space, drawn by something they could not fully explain, but desperately wanted to understand. Near the memorial, a group of new cadets practiced formation movements under the watchful eye of Commander Kim Hae, one of the few human survivors of the early night program. The cadets included species that had been enemies for centuries, now learning to work together under a code that transcended old hatreds. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" said a familiar voice behind Veltar. He turned to see Ambassador Kim Dae, the human diplomat who had first tried to explain the concept of knighthood to the Galactic Council. The older man looked tired but pleased as he watched the training exercises. "I never expected this," Veltar admitted. "When I first observed Captain Park Min, I thought his behavior was a curious anomaly. I never imagined it would spread to other species." Kim Dae smiled. "Perhaps that's because you were looking at it backwards. You thought Captain Park Min was unusual among humans. The truth is, most humans have that potential inside them. We just needed the right circumstances to bring it out." The establishment of the Order had not been easy. The Galactic Council had debated for months about whether to formally recognize human knighthood as a legitimate military organization. Many species were suspicious of warriors who claimed to fight for ideals rather than territory or resources. The breakthrough had come when pirate attacks increased along the Outer Rim territories. Traditional military responses had failed because pirates could simply move to new areas when confronted by superior forces. But when the first human knight squads were deployed, something different happened. The knights did not try to hunt down pirate fleets or capture their bases. Instead, they positioned themselves as permanent protectors of civilian populations. They lived among the people they protected, learning their customs and earning their trust. When pirates attacked, they found not just resistance, but entire communities willing to fight alongside their protectors. Within 6 months, pirate activity in night-protected sectors dropped by 70%. The pirates had discovered something that military strategists had never considered. It was almost impossible to defeat an enemy who genuinely cared more about protecting others than preserving themselves. The Council approved the Kim Dae protocols last week, the ambassador told Veltar. "From now on, any species can request night protection for their civilian populations." Veltar nodded. He had helped write those protocols, drawing on his unique experience as both an observer of human knighthood and a practitioner of it. The rules were simple but revolutionary. Knights would serve without payment, protect without discrimination, and answer to no government except their own code of honor. "What troubles me," Veltar said, "is that we still do not fully understand why it works. Why do beings from species that evolved competitive survival behaviors choose to embrace altruistic service?" Kim Dae watched as a young Zenthari cadet helped a fallen Corvani back to her feet during a training exercise. 6 months ago, those two species had been at war. Now they trained together as brothers and sisters in arms. "Maybe," the ambassador said thoughtfully, "it works because deep down every intelligent species knows that pure competition leads to endless conflict. Perhaps what humans discovered is not something alien, but something that every species wishes they could be." As if to prove his point, a group of alien civilians approached the memorial garden, carrying flowers from their homeworlds. They were refugees whose transport ships had been saved by night squadrons in recent months. They came from dozens of different species, but they shared a common gratitude for warriors who asked nothing in return for their protection. Veltar watched as a small human child, no more than 6 years old, placed a drawing at the base of the memorial. The picture showed stick figures in white tunics standing between larger, darker figures and a group of smaller ones. Even a child could understand what knights represented. The Order now has over 3,000 active members, Kim Day said. Recruitment requests come in every day, but more importantly, the idea is spreading. Species that cannot join the Order are creating their own versions of knighthood, adapted to their cultures. Veltar touched the silver belt that marked his rank. Do you think Captain Park Min knew what he was starting when he chose to protect those refugee ships? I think he knew exactly what he was doing, Kim Day replied. He was being a knight. Everything that followed was just the natural consequence of that choice.